Yeah. Hi everyone. Thanks that you're here. My talk, Moats in the Machine, why most DePINs don't defend and how energy can, is maybe not your typical talk. I'm not going to speak a lot about Powerledger either. I think most of you are aware of it. If not, please come to me after this talk and I'm happy to tell you more about it. My goal was to give you as much alpha as possible if you want to build in DePIN, or if you already build your own DePIN and want to just improve on where you're at. This talk also comes from a thesis that generally you don't build moats by just creating incentives, but by actually building messy yet defensible advantages over your competitors. It's very much a thought that DePINs are successful if they follow more the traditional route of building a business out, and not just these incentive-driven flywheels that we often see in many of the DePINs. Generally, not all DePINs are created equal. I think I would even argue most DePINs probably strive for growth rather than actual real demand-side product market fit. And we see that in different industries, whether that is in energy, whether that is in wireless, whether that is in compute. There's always some form of clash between these incentive engines that many DePINs are and the infrastructure businesses that are built on top of these incentive engines. And incentives are nice, but there has to be a foundation to it. Also, just because you have a very strong brand, a very strong name, or a lot of followers and a big community doesn't mean you have a moat. It usually means you have momentum. The moat really comes from things like supply-side scarcity, switching costs, regulatory rights, all things that might not be easy to tackle in the beginning, but eventually make you defensible against other new entrants into the industry or into the market, or that allow you to generate revenue irrespective of just your token. Also, what really sets DePIN apart, and I think that we can all agree on, we have this clash between physics and memes. I know I put this very controversial in a way. I'm a big fan of pump.fun, so I like meme coins. But I think there's a specific differentiation. When you think of DePINs, often as soon as they start having a physical component, whether that is infrastructure, whether that is hardware, that could be anything from a sensor that Onoko uses, or any form of miner that Helium has. These things touch atoms and they create a barrier that general software doesn't have. So if you look at pump.fun, well, they're generating revenue like crazy, or they have been. Then for a few 3 months after token launch, their revenue went down drastically because suddenly meme coins weren't as big of a thing anymore. And now they're back with video streaming. Their revenue is up, their business model is something completely different. And what goes to show is that if you actually build with applications in mind, with infrastructure in mind, which DePIN does as a subpart of this Web3 sphere, you can create barriers that many other applications in crypto cannot. And that's why I'm still very bullish for DePIN, but you have to make sure that you really do touch these atoms. Generally, what are pitfalls to avoid? I think one of the biggest pitfalls is that just because you sell a lot of miners and because you can generate supply doesn't mean you have product market fit. I think it's quite obvious nowadays that we could say that the product market fit really only comes from demand side, from demand on the demand side, or revenue from the demand side. What that means is, let's take an example like Accurist. Who of you knows Accurist? Accurist is a really cool project that basically offers decentralized compute, and anyone can use an old phone of theirs to have a miner at home. Most of you have old phones at home. You can just basically, with one scan of a QR code, you have set up your miner and you start mining the tokens. Supply side solved. So you have a lot of people supplying because you'll always find people that are willing to even maybe for a few bucks, buy some form of miner with the promise that they will mine a token that will just go up over time. All right, supply side sold. Now, Accurist has the problem, they have this decentralized compute, but who's building on this decentralized compute? Who actually pays for this decentralized compute? With Accurist, for example, they've went to larger corporations. They work with Tezos, for example. They built the TZBTC stack for Tezos. These are ways to get demand, but if you want demand from users, from retail users, from everyday users, you have to be attractive enough that they're willing to pay for your service. And otherwise, as a DePIN, you often are a two-sided marketplace. And many times you have an oversupply and an under demand. And that's why real PMF comes from the demand side. And these pitfalls basically just show this. So perverse tokenomics or mercenary supply, basically you subsidize people by giving them tokens, by promising that the tokens will go up. You give people the feeling that they can affect what's happening within your company by giving them some random governance votes, which usually don't really have any impact anyway. And maybe that's a discussion for the people that are really into DAOs. I am not. But again, you have this subsidy addiction and you have these really fake PMF signals because, yeah, maybe you've generated $500,000 in revenue selling miners, but you still have no demand from the demand side revenue. Now, here's a quick self-audit, and please remind yourself of that question. I will ask it again at the end. Is if you have a DePIN or if you're thinking about doing a DePIN, if you remove the token, what remains? And who would be willing to still pay for your service even if there wasn't a token? And that is a really important question, because if you answer that with not much, then you're really having more of a narrative play than you actually have a value. Generally, energy works a bit different than other verticals. Also, when you look at Powerledger, we operate in a different way because our demand and our supply side is pretty much already existing due to the energy market. We have general things like grid constraints. We have large capex cycles. So we're talking about infrastructure that lasts for decades, and people aren't willing, utilities aren't willing to invest in new infrastructure. So you might not be wanting to start selling hardware. And you have compliance regulations. So while all these things are really painful, in order to get started, once you're actually in the industry, you can defend against it. You will have data sovereignty, for example. You will have compliance experience. These are all things that utilities, that prosumers, that anyone in the energy space is willing to pay for. And the same obviously applies to some extent in other industries, but energy is very, very special in this case. Generally, what we learned at Powerledger, real customers pay for reliability. They don't pay for UI, they don't care. They care for trusted data, reliable data, verifiable data. Whether your product looks the nicest doesn't really matter to the people that are paying for it and that are going to continue to pay for it. They also don't care much whether your token appreciates in value or doesn't, because they're not here for the token, they're here for the value that you offer to them. The second thing is telemetry is a moat. And again, that is not just true for energy, that is true for most DePINs. If you have trusted and verifiable data where you can go even behind the meter in energy, for example, that gives you a defensible moat against other entrants in the market. And the last thing is kind of regulation. And why do I put this as kind of a takeaway? Regulation is slow, which means there's two benefits to that. On the one side, you can experiment. Regulation will come eventually. You cannot wait for regulation to regulate all the things that you want to build. Go and try it out. Maybe eventually regulation comes, but you've already taken your learnings and you've made your experience, and then you can adapt to what the regulation allows you. And also use regulation as a guideline. It's basically like bowling, but instead of just you have like these kits like barriers on the side where you're going to hit, maybe you're not going to hit a strike even if you're bad, but you're going to hit a target. So use regulation in that, and design for regulation, and don't dodge it. It doesn't make sense to run around it or run around or go around some of the realities of everyday life. Design for it. I always say large regulators, large companies, the Googles of the world, they're like mountains. You can either decide to climb them or to walk around them. I believe it's better to work on top of them. Build something that you can build on top of that mountain. For us, it's the utilities. We work directly with the utilities. We don't offer anything that is outside of the sphere of operations of these utilities. And that has allowed us to really generate revenue over time. Also, to leave you with something, unfortunately you can't really see it, but to leave you with something that we've come up over the last few months, we call it the 3-2-1 moat playbook. It's something that you can basically check yourself every time you want to check whether your project is on the right path or whether you're thinking of building a DePIN yourself. Do you control the three rights, or one of these three rights? The physical right, the regulatory right, or the data right? Do you control one of these two stacks, the capital stack or the market stack? And then at the end, ask yourself again and do the remove the token audit. If you remove the token, but you own any of these, will people still be willing to pay for it? And the question to you is then, so where does your moat actually sit? Is it physics, permits, data, or is it capital? Just pick one. You don't have to solve all of them, you just have to solve one of them. And the token comes next. And then lastly, just as a reminder, if your token is the only thing holding supply, you don't have product market fit, you have a bubble. Thank you.